Hi there. It's March the 30th, and in our journey through Torah, we come to chapters 13, 14, and 15 of the book of Deuteronomy, which in Hebrew is Devarim, meaning the words, because it's the words that Moses is given to speak to the people of Israel, the opening words of the book. So there are different subjects covered in these three chapters. First of all, in chapter 13, there's a definite prohibition against anyone leading the people of Israel astray to other gods and to worshipping God, whether that's an individual prophet or dreamer, someone who says, oh, I've had a word or I've dreamed a dream that says we should go after other gods. That is forbidden, and they are to actually stone the person who's doing that and excise him from the community. Similarly, if there's a city that is getting into criminality or getting into idol worship, that city is to be destroyed as well. There is an absolute veto on anybody going anywhere away from God, because the people belong to God. They're his special treasure. Then in Deuteronomy 14, there's a rehearsal again of the things that may and may not be eaten. Basically, those animals that don't chew the cud and split the hoof are not kosher. That's meaning that they're not pure, and therefore they're not to be eaten. There's also instructions about the tithe and what to do with the tithe. Interestingly, at the end of Deuteronomy 14, the tithe is to be brought in and to be consumed in a kind of a festival and a feast by the people who bring it in, except that every 3 years the Levites are to be given the tithe for themselves, and they are to eat the tithe themselves. The tithe is something that is given to the Lord, basically, although the people are eating with God in the sense that they're eating the tithe, or the Levites are eating the tithe. And then in Deuteronomy 15, it opens up with the subject of the Shemitah. And the Shemitah is a word that in Hebrew means a release or amnesty. And it's basically about debts, about people who have owed money. At the end of the 7 years, those debts are written off. Imagine if that was part of our society today, if every 7 years all our debts were written off. It would be amazing. But God is saying, these things don't belong to you that you're living in. These lands don't belong to you. All of its abundance are actually mine, and you only have them on loan anyway. And is also warning against not lending to a fellow Israelite because the 7th year is coming up. That's considered to be a sin. And then also there's a subject of if someone has sold themselves into slavery, that was a possibility as well. If debts couldn't be sold, then they became the slave of the person to whom they owed. And at the end of 7 years, they were to be released. They were to be set free, except that if a slave or if someone who was working for a master said, no, I love you, I don't want to go out free, I want to remain part of your household, then the master of the household would drill through his ear here, the lobe, with an awl, with a sharp nail, and nail it to the doorpost as a symbol that he was now part permanently of that household. We tend to call that process the making of a bond slave. And the bond slave then stayed as part of that household. At the end of Deuteronomy 15, there are instructions as well about the firstborn animals. Remember, the firstborn of men and animals were holy to the Lord. The firstborn of humankind in Israel had been redeemed by the tribe of Levi becoming holy the Lord's. But firstborn animals were not allowed to be used for work or for production. They were to be sacrificed, and interestingly enough, again, eaten by the people. So they are to use those as a sacrifice to the Lord, but they actually get the blessing of it. So he's saying, you eat of these things. Just to pick up one thing here, that this picture in Deuteronomy 15 of the bond slave in 15:16 is a powerful picture of our connection with God, that we want to offer ourselves wholeheartedly. There's an old hymn that says, I love my master, I will not go out free. And Jesus has given himself wholeheartedly for us, not with nails through his ears, but actually nails through his hands and feet. He has become in that sense our servant, our bondslave of love, and therefore we also in return give him our whole beings as his bondslaves of love, as God's servants without without question and without repentance. Have a very good March the 30th.